Next question. Will bankruptcy hurt your spouse's credit rating? That's a great question, but it infers something. It infers that one spouse filed over another. And that's a question I get asked a lot, and I answer a lot. Just because one person in the marriage wants to file bankruptcy, do both spouses have to file? The answer is no, not at all. In other words, let's say, use my wife and I as an example. Let's say, for example, she came into the marriage with a lot of debt. Now, when I married her, did I inherit that debt? Did I marry that debt? And the answer is no, that's insane. What I did is I married her. Now, if she brought that debt with her, I, as her spouse, am in the marriage and we're going through this thing together. But automatically my name and my social security number does not attach to her debt. I automatically don't get thrown onto the contracts that she entered into prior to the marriage. So no, one person in a marriage can file bankruptcy without the other. We do it all the time. Now that leads into the next question. Will bankruptcy hurt my spouse's credit rating? And there's a yes and a no answer there, and let me tell you why. Let's go back to the example we just used. My wife comes into the marriage and she's got a ton of debt, okay? If I'm not associated with any of her debt, then there's absolutely no way her bankruptcy will affect my credit rating. And the reason why is the only thing that goes on your individual credit report are those debts or those things that happen in your life that are solely and specifically your obligation. Let me repeat that. If she came into the marriage with a credit card debt, I'm not associated with that. I didn't sign that contract, and therefore that debt is not mine. So if she files bankruptcy, that bankruptcy should not show up on my credit report. If it does, I'm going to take the next logical step, and I'm going to dispute like crazy everything on there. I want to see that what that creditor has on me. If that creditor, let's call it Visa, if Visa is putting a negative trade line on my credit report because they say I owe a debt, I'm going to dispute that, and I want to see any documentation that they have. If they verify that debt and it's hurting my credit score and it damages me in some way, shape, or form, then you better believe I've got a good cause of action against Visa, and I'm going to pursue it. I'm going to hire an attorney, and I'm going to sue Visa for damaging my credit report, damaging me, and putting false information on my credit report. So the general question, going back to that, was, will bankruptcy hurt your spouse's credit rating? I say no. Now, part two of that question is, what if we have joint debt? That's an interesting argument, and here's why. Let's say, for example, my wife and I get married. She comes into the marriage with a ton of debt. Same example, but this time, after we get married, we buy a car and we co-sign it. In other words, we're both liable for the debt. The reason I chose a car is because two things can happen with a car. Either number one, she surrenders the car in her bankruptcy and she says, I don't want to pay for it anymore. Number two, she says she wants to keep it, and then we both continue to pay for it because we're both legally obligated to make this debt. Let's go back to number one. Let's say she wants to walk away from it. I'll have on my credit report the obligation, and as long as I keep making the payments, there should be no negative information on my credit report because I'm living up to my obligation. At the same point in time, that debt should show up on her credit report as well as being paid, even though it was included in the bankruptcy. There's a double-edged sword there. And if we decide to keep it and keep paying for it, the same thing will happen. So at that point in time, she has a choice whether she wants to keep it and get rid of it. I would advise her to not sign a reaffirmation agreement and walk away from that car as to her. And the reason why is, why give the bank or credit company or lender an opportunity to get her back on the hook when she's escaped? Think about it. When she files bankruptcy, her obligation on that car loan is now gone. She doesn't have to pay it anymore. I do, because I'm still legally obligated to pay that promissory note. So why would I put her back on a note that she's not obligated for? It's like me going to the bank and saying, hey, you know what? I'm a really nice guy, and I know I owe you the money for this car. Let me just add my wife to the obligation as well, and you don't have to do a thing. Does that make sense? Of course not. The whole goal is to get free from your obligations with bankruptcy. That's what she's doing. I'm still legally obligated to pay for the car, which is fine. So that's what I'll keep doing, and I'll keep paying for the car. So going back to that, will it hurt my credit rating if she files bankruptcy? No, not in my scenarios. Is there a scenario where a spouse's bankruptcy filing will hurt my credit report? Absolutely. Happens all the time. Think about this. Let's say, for example, husband and wife get divorced, okay? The wife says, I'm going to keep the house and keep making payments on it. The husband moves to Seattle, okay? He's gone, he starts a new family, gets married. 5 years later, we hit a depression, kind of like we did 3 years ago. The wife says, uh-oh, my house is now way upside down. I've lost my job. I can't pay for it anymore. Here's the problem. Go back to the divorce paperwork. The divorce paperwork, the wife said she's going to keep the house, keep making payments on it. The husband moves away. When the wife can no longer make payments on it, both are still obligated on the note. When she can't afford to make payments on it, that's when there's going to be a problem because it's going to affect her credit report. There's also the situation where the husband is still on that note, and now he's living someplace else. He's not worried about it. He doesn't even know she's not making payments, but it's hurting his credit report as well because he's still obligated on it. That's the one time, and it happens a lot, but that's the one scenario where a co-signing can hurt a spouse's credit report going down the line. And it's something you got to be careful of because it happens a lot with cars. Let's say, for example, I co-sign for my nephew, and he's got a car loan. Then he's driving down the road, forgets to pay his insurance, and he gets in a car wreck. And he says, oh, I owe $20,000 on this car. I'm not going to pay for it anymore. Well, guess what? The first day he misses that payment, that's going to affect my credit score. So kind of like the spouse situation, any co-signing situation falls into that same category that ultimately, if somebody on that note doesn't pay the debt, you got a problem. So that gets into my little theory of if you're going to co-sign a loan for somebody, what should you do to protect yourself? Well, number one, you should be ready, willing, and able to pay that loan off at the drop of a hat. In other words, if I was going to co-sign a loan for, go back to my nephew again, he said to me, let me co-sign, can you please co-sign for me because I want to buy a car and I want to build some credit. I'm going to say, all right, I'm going to sit him down, I'm going to explain to him everything he needs to do to make sure that this loan never goes into default. Number one, he's going to have an emergency reserve fund set aside in case he runs into a problem, so that bill's paid. Number two, if the payment's due on the 15th of the month, I want to make sure it gets paid by the 1st. And I want to see the receipt at least by the 8th or the 7th so that I've still got a week to make that payment if he doesn't, so it doesn't affect my credit score. Number three, I'm going to want some kind of written or verbal warning from him saying, hey, Uncle Carm, I got a problem because I can't pay this bill this month and I'm going to need you to pick up the slack. And number four, when that happens, he's going to have some way to work off that debt if I have to pay it off. That's going to be the problem. But then the car is also going to be in my name because I'm going to take it away if he can't pay for it. Sounds kind of harsh, I know, but the reality is in this society, we place way too much emphasis on credit reports. And the fact of it is, if you have a good credit score, you're able to borrow money at a much lower interest rate. One little blemish on your credit report, and you would think the sky is falling, because now, oh my gosh, your interest rates have to go up because you're a bad credit risk, and it could come at the result of being somebody else's fault, not your own. So that's really what I'm concerned about, and that's why I want to protect myself and my clients, saying, if you have to co-sign a loan in the future, make sure there's specific guidelines as to what you expect, that there's a reserve fund, that there's ample communication, and that there's a reserve fund to pay off the loan if that's absolutely necessary.